Welcome back, listeners, to a brand new episode of the New Standard. If you checked out the program yesterday and there was no audio, I was just playing an April Fool's joke on you. That's how I'll clean it up. Yes, that's cap though, but that's how I'll try to clean it up. That it was an April Fool's joke. Unfortunately, I had my mic off when I was doing the show, but hey, man, I'm just going to throw it off to an April Fool's joke. But with that, I want to welcome everybody back to the program. The title of this week's program is Best Player Available is Cap. And if you want to participate in the program, make sure you hit the like and subscribe to the program. Again, I'm telling you guys, we're not doing these live until Neil gets back. We're just kind of recording them and putting them out there. So I want to apologize for that. But if you like the content, man, please like and subscribe, spread the word. Find us on YouTube by doing a search for the New Standard and Lance Williams and or Neil Coulong. Also, however you get your podcast, you can do the search the same way, the New Standard and Steelers and Neil Coulong, the New Standard, Steelers and Lance Williams, any combination of those, and you'll find out and find the show. Now, I want to start off with the title of the show. And we're jumping into the cap, not the cap, I should say. We're jumping into the draft. Apologies. We're jumping into the draft. And, the draft is coming up April 25th. And so we want to break down, just from the perspective of the New Standard, how we take a look at the draft in terms of needs, BPA, best player available. And I just want to say this right now. Best player available is cap. It's absolutely cap. And so, and I want to say that by saying teams do not use best player available as a criteria to draft players. Imagine, so for instance, let me give you an example. What if Bijan Robinson was available last year to the Steelers to draft in the first round? They're not going to draft Bijan Robinson, even though he may have been the best player available. It's not a need. It's not a need. Best player available in need, they have to intersect. Teams just don't go, oh, that's the best player on the board. I have two great corners. I'm just going to draft three corners in the next three rounds because where my place in the draft lands, the corners are the best player. It doesn't make sense like that. It doesn't operate like that. Teams don't operate that way, and teams don't operate with the same draft boards. Teams don't even have full draft boards that range for like 7 rounds. I mean, all of this is cap. These best play, that stuff is cap. A lot of these mocks, I mean, they're fun. They're fun. I follow some mocks. We'll go through some mocks before we get to the 25th. But I think what I wanted to do on this show was just kind of dig into more so needs and define needs and how teams draft around needs. And to do that, I think the first thing that's really important to do, and I want to thank Neil, and I want to thank a guy on Twitter, and let me credit the guy correctly from Twitter. Let me credit Jonathan JN_Steve, who gave his definition of needs as well. And I kind of put all of our thoughts into a mix and came up with what I'm defining as needs. But I want to go through each one individually. And again, you're checking out the New Standard. Best player available is cap. And this is how I define it. It's a position group that does not have a starter on the roster or that is above a replacement level. Let me say that again because I kind of flubbed the read. A position group that doesn't have a starter on the roster or the current starter is not above replacement level. And replacement level is a term that the guys, it used to be Football Outsiders, but I think it's like FTN, Fantasy Network, something, where Aaron Schwartz and those guys came up with a formula called DVOA and DYAR. And those help establish what a replacement is. What is a replacement level player? And to give you an example, while I wax poetic, I'm going to give you an example as I continue to go on as to what is a replacement player as defined by those guys. And it's going to be from the quarterback position. But before I say that, though, this is what Neil said when he talked about his definition. And Neil's going to be back on the show very shortly. Big up to Neil. Got some things cooking on the outside. And Neil defined it as this: a position that needs an upgrade now, a position that will need an upgrade in 2 years, an impact position, always a need. I want you to keep that in mind. Impact position. Neil also added that definition is just one part of the equation. Need to also weigh in value of the position itself. Some teams flat out avoid certain positions in the first round. The key thing to take from this second blurb from Neil is position value and positional value. And you guys might be asking yourself the obvious question: what is positional value? It's as it sounds, positional value. What positions are the most valuable? That's it, positional value. It's easy. No mysterious definition there. Again, you're checking out the new standard. Make sure you like and subscribe to the program. Please support us. Hit that notification bell. We're going to keep bringing you outstanding programming. And again, positional value. It is what it is. There's nothing mysterious about positional value. It's what positions are the most valuable on the football, and what positions are going to drive winning more than other positions. Now, we talked about, as I'm trying to get to this DVOA and player stats, I should have had this up already, but I'm showing that I can't operate a mouse, but that means I'm just getting older. And again, I want to wish everybody out there a happy Easter, happy Resurrection Day. Let me jump into these player stats. And so a replacement level player is a player that has a negative DVOA or zero DVOA or below. And if you want the definition of DVA, go to the website ftnfantasy.com and do a search for DVOA. Now, we're just looking at the quarterback position, and this will give you an idea of what a replacement player is. Now, in terms of passing attempts, we're going to put it at the minimum of 250 passing attempts to try to define for you what a replacement level player is according to DVOA. Now, looking at 250 pass attempts as the minimum amount of attempts, DVOA is going to be, a replacement player is going to be a player that is close to a 0% DVOA. Now, when you look at this, interestingly enough, Kenny Pickett had a 1.7 DVOA. Gardner Minshew had a 1.5 DVOA. Kyler Murray had a 0.0 DVA, and this is going to be controversial. Russell Wilson had a minus 2.2% DVOA. So what that is saying is that Russell Wilson on the year, his value at the quarterback position was 2% less than the replacement level player. Kyler Murray was at 0.0 and Kenny Pickett was at 1.7. Don't kill the messenger if you are a Russell Wilson fan, but it just gives you an idea of what I'm going to use as a metric to define what a replacement level player is. On the converse, the player with the best DVOA was Brock Purdy. Now, that's not necessarily saying Brock Purdy is the best quarterback in the NFL, but the top 5 DVOAs in the league were Brock Purdy, Tua Tagovailoa, Jared Goff, CJ Stroud, Josh Allen. You throw in Jordan Love, Lamar Jackson, Dak Prescott, Matthew Stafford, Kirk Cousins. DVOA does a fantastic job to me because it measures play by play of defining value. So that's what we're going to talk about in terms of replacement player when we're given these definitions. So to refer back to the definitions, position group that does not have a starter on the roster or a current starter is not above replacement level. Now, I took what Neil said as well and blended it in and made it even more specific when we added in JN_Steve, and big up to Jonathan on Twitter, on X. And he added that a pressing need is if you have no starter on the roster, and a need is a starter that is at replacement level or beneath replacement level. Now, take that all into a vacuum. Put it all into a pot of jambalaya, stir it around with some Old Bay. And I took from Neil, myself, from Jonathan, and came up and synthesized these 3 needs and put them in these little boxes. Because when it comes to need, you have to assess positional value when it comes to need. Because you may not have a place kicker on the roster, right? But that's probably not going to be a high need or an urgent need for you because they're easily replaceable. In terms of positional value, they're not highly valued positions. And the way I define positional value, I did it based on the franchise tag. And there's a popular term in politics and almost everything in life. Follow the damn money. I mean, when you want to say something's happening, follow the money. And if you look at the 2024 franchise tags, quarterback is number 1, 38 million. Linebacker is second, 24 million. Now, the one thing about the franchise tag is it does not differentiate, say, for instance, a middle linebacker from TJ Watt. Obviously, TJ Watt is way more valuable than your average or your even top tier, or let's just say he's more valuable than Patrick Queen, has more of an impact probably on winning than Patrick Green, and it's reflected in how they're paid. But when they come up with the franchise numbers, everybody who plays linebacker, it is averaged in. So the franchise tag for the linebacker position is number 2 at 24 million. Defensive tackle is 3 at 22 million. Wide receiver, 21 million. Defensive end, 21 million. Offensive lineman, 20.9 million. Cornerback, 19.8. I was surprised at that. Safety, 17.1. Tight end, 12. Running back, 11. And special teams at 6 million. We're going to define for this particular show high value positions as the top 4: quarterbacks, linebackers, D tackles, and wide receivers. Defensive end, offensive lineman, cornerbacks, and safety, medium value. Tight end, running back, and special teams, low value. Now, again, I'm just using the money as my barometer to measure this. So I think that's a nice way to segue into how I'm going to define an urgent need, a need, and a nice to have. I think an urgent need is if you have no player or limited players at a high value position who are playing above replacement level. So if you don't have a quarterback, a linebacker, a defensive tackle, or a wide receiver playing above replacement level on your roster, you have an urgent need at that position. Now, to expand it and add a little sprinkle that Neil also put it in this was if that position is no longer going to be on your roster. And I think you could add that to all of these within 1 to 2 years. So for that example, that would be Hayward. That'd be Big Cam. Cam's gone in 1 and 2 years, right? And even though they have Benton and so on and others, you could argue to yourself, is that an urgent need or not? Now, a need I'm defining as no starter at a high to medium positional value that are above replacement level. Think of the Steelers roster. Get some names bubbling and circulating in your head. And we're going to go back to these position groups. A nice to have is a position group, a low to medium valued position group that has above replacement level starters. For instance, for the Steelers, it would be the outside linebacker position. You don't have a lot of depth at the position, but you do have maybe the premier outside linebacker sack duo in the National Football League. So that position, in my opinion, is not a need or an urgent need. Again, listeners, you're checking out The New Standard. Make sure you hit that notification bell, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you like and subscribe and tell all your friends. Get us on podcast as well. So with that being said, I think we've laid it out nicely in terms of what's an urgent need, what's a need, and what's a nice to have. And I think where this all works itself in the process is when this lines up, particularly in the first round. If you're going to bump into a position group that has high to medium value, you've got an urgent need for it, then you can probably predict that that position group is going to be targeted in the first round. Now, in my opinion, a good football team does not have a lot of urgent needs. When I look at the Steelers team and I think about the first round draft pick, and this is where we're going to settle on, because I'm not a draft nick. I don't watch a ton of college football, so I'm not going to try to give you a 7-round mock. Hell, I'm not going to give you any mocks. I particularly don't like mocks. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to, based on my definition of urgent need, and nice to haves, I'm going to give you the position groups that slot into those. And because of that, I'm going to let you know where I think the Steelers, or what position group I think the Steelers are going to target in the first round. So in terms of nice to haves, you look at the Steelers roster, again, nice to have, low to medium position group that has above replacement starters. I think you look at the Steelers group, it's the linebackers. I think the middle linebacker position, the outside linebacker position, they have quality depth after free agency, especially when you add a Patrick Queen. That they have solid, they have a nice group of backers, and you have some players that are coming back after injury. It's actually, in my opinion, kind of a stacked group for this team. So I think linebacker position, I think it slots into the nice to haves. And I think also in terms of the nice to haves would be the safety position. You've got Minkah, you got some other guys that they've brought in. So I think that's a nice to have as well. In terms of needs, no starter at a high to medium positional value that are above replacement level. I think that's offensive tackle, D tackle, cornerback, and interior offensive line. At the tackle position, replacement level is the key phrase to think about. I think Dan Moore or Dan Less is a replacement level player. He's not playing above replacement level. That puts offensive tackle in the mix. Cameron Hayward's status, his age, and the fact that you only really have, Ogunjobi, you have the young ball player Benton going into a second year, not a lot of depth at the position. So I think that slots into a need as well. Cornerback, you've got one solid corner on a roster, Joey Porter Jr. So that's definitely a need. The biggest need of the needs that I'm listing from the position groups is center. You only have one center on the roster. I dare anybody to respond to this show with the guy's name without looking it up. Hell, I don't know the guy's name. It means they don't have one. They don't have one on the roster. They just got a Joe that can snap the ball. You may not snap the ball ever in the game. So that is a need at the interior offensive line, specifically the center position. Now let's go back to urgent need. No player or a limited, number of players at a high value position group that are above replacement level. And I think what stands out when you look at the Steelers roster, it's got to be wide receiver. They got one player on their team that plays above a replacement level, and that's George Pickens. Now that Deontay Johnson is gone, they don't have another weapon at the wide receiver position. Another position I would throw in as a nice to have would be the tight end position. I think that's a nice to have. You look at their roster, you look at the wide receivers, it's actually comical. Their wide receiver room is ass cheeks. Pause. You just look at their Dez Fitzpatrick, Marquez Callaway, Calvin Austin III, Khalil Harris, Van Jefferson, Denzel Mims, Quez Watkins, Deuce Watts. Hey, man, you don't got to hide your women and children from any of them. So in terms of urgent need, I think they got an urgent need at the wide receiver position. So with the first round draft pick, if there is a guy that they value at the wide receiver position who has a first round grade from them, maybe a high first, maybe a low first or a high second round grade, you could see them, in my opinion, going for a wide receiver in the first round. Other than that, I think the first round draft pick is going to come from wide receiver, offensive tackle, defensive tackle, cornerback, or an interior offensive line. You might be saying to yourself, well, damn, Lance, you picked 6 position groups. How can you get it wrong? Well, team has some needs, not a lot of urgent needs, but they got some needs. It just is what it is. I'm not here to try to be Lance Stradamus and pick picks out of the air. And hell, if I was that, I'd probably getting paid more for this. But anyway, again, positional value, need, best player available is cap. Don't believe that stuff. When you hear that, don't believe that stuff. No, nobody does that. Nobody just the best player left on the board. Nobody does that. Don't believe it when people say that. But definitely, when you look at urgent needs, and nice to haves, again, wide receiver, offensive tackle, defensive tackle, corner, and inside interior offensive line. I think you will get your number one pick from those position groups. But with that, we're going to conclude the program. And as always, tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe. Go Steelers.